What's going on? Welcome back. In today's video, we're gonna explain in detail the Windows file system and permissions. And we're gonna try to draw a comparison or a mapping between the Windows file system and the Linux one. So in the last videos, we talked about the Linux file system, explained the permissions. Now we will shift the focus on Windows. So as you can see here, Windows file system. Okay, so in Windows, we have files, we have logical drives, and we have folders. And as all of you know, most of you are Windows users, I would assume. In logical drives, you have the system drive and you have an extended drive. Most probably, you would create an extended drive by using the partitioning. So you have a system drive by default after you install the Windows, and you have then the extended drive, which is created by partitioning the Windows or the partitioning the hard drive. Sometimes you don't want to partition, you just get along with only the C drive. Now, the file is self-explanatory. Any file could be PNG, could be PDF, Word. Now, the folders, we have key folders in Windows file system. So in the C directory here, you will find perf logs, which stands for performance logs, Windows users, program files. Now, performance logs, as the name depicts or as the name states, it stores information about the system performance and the system issues, the logs, right? So here I explained that here. So performance logs, it's all about storing performance logs and system issues. Windows, so in the Windows directory, you will find, the code or the operating system files that are used to run Windows. Users, Windows, let me take the color. So Windows users contains the user's file, desktop downloads. Now in Linux, this corresponds to home. So this one, home directory in Linux, right? Now, the logs here, what is the directory that corresponds to logs in Linux? So in Linux, you have the var, right? In var directory, it's used to store logs, the same with Windows, performance logs. Now the Windows, it's like, there is no direct match, okay? But it's much like the boot in Linux. So here I would say it's boot. It could be right, it could be wrong. You can give me your suggestions. Linux, take. Because actually, why I'm saying boot in Linux? Since Windows has the files used to boot the OS, right? The same with Linux. Linux has the boot directory, which is used to boot the OS. Now, program files, which most probably corresponds to /opt, because opt contains the software packages. Okay, now we have explained the structure, the folders, important folders, their function, the logical drives, and the mapping with Linux. Now let's go to file permissions. So Windows, we have many file permissions as opposed to Linux. In Linux, you have read, write, and execute, right? This is for Linux. But in Windows, you have much more. So let's go over each single one of these. So first, we have the full control. The full control, you have the ability to read, write, execute, modify. Technically, if you have full control over the folder or the file, you can pretty much do anything here. You can modify on the file, you can read, this is for execute. You can list files, read, write, and you have special permissions. So the full control encompasses all of the permissions, plus one more thing. In full control, you can set permissions for other users, right? For users. Most probably, the full control is held by the administrator of the system. Okay, what about modify? Now, modify allows you to read, okay, and write and execute. So in Linux, modify corresponds to 777, right? You can read, you can write, you can modify on the file. That's for modify. Now, of course, read and execute self-explanatory, read, read files, here, modify, write files, but list. So list only list the content of the folder. So you can, in Linux, you can do ls, it means ls. You can list the content of the folder. Okay, now, if you are working from the command line, you will find different letters for every kind of permission. Now, what about explaining every one of these? So this one is inherited, which means that if you have a folder, say it is desktop, okay, and you have the I permission, it means that the permissions that you will have over the desktop are inherited from the parent container. In our case, desktop, the parent is users. So whatever permissions you have on the users directory will be applied to desktop if you have the I, which is inherited. Now F stands for full access, full control. So F here, so full control is F. Now M is modify. So let's go back. Here it is M. Here is object inherit. Same concept as the I alone. And here is container inherit. Okay, what about this? This is read and execute. Much like here, the same as this one. What about the AD? So the AD is appending data or add data. Most of the time, if you have the AD, you can add files to the current directory. In our case, in our example, it's desktop, and you can add to the subdirectories. In case you have under desktop, like here, something like whatever, Windows, not Windows. We have Windows before. Like John directory. So if you have 80 over desktop, you will be able to add files to all of the directories in desktop, including John. What about WD? WD is write and add files. Okay, if you go down to the command line, okay, so we've seen the purpose of one of these directories. Now let's, in default Windows installation, you won't find these directories like maxmain. These are user installed by me. Now let's explain the user permissions or the file permissions. If you go to users, here for listing the directory, we have me. Go to my directory. Let's go to desktop. See what we have here. Okay, let's take an example of explaining the permissions on one file. For example, on any disk, right? So we use a tool called ICACLS, and we specify the file name or the directory name. That's how we view the permissions of, or the permissions applied on that directory or on that folder or file. So let's take an example, any disk. So on any disk, as you can see, the system, which is the system, has I and F. So it inherits the permissions from the container. The container in this case is desktop. Okay, and it has F, full control over this file. The administrators group, right? They have inheritance from the parent container, which is desktop, and full control. And me, finally me, because I am within the administrators group, I inherit the same permissions, I and F. Let's take another example. So if we display the permissions of the desktop, let's see here. So me, an example, me, as you can see, me, let me make this bigger. So me here, right? I have the same permissions as the administrators. Why? Because I'm within the group. So I have OI, object inheritance, CI, and F. So since I have F here, full control, I don't need to worry about other permissions. Let's take a look at everyone. Everyone, which means everyone other than me, because I'm the single user or the sole user of the system, they have only read and execute. So everyone other than me, they can read the files on the desktop and they can execute applications. So it's very important to understand the use of this tool and to to interpret the permission or the letters here to be able to conduct an auditing. If you are tasked to conduct a pen test on a Windows system, you have to, in some stage or later down the road, you will be confronted with some directories and files that you will need to determine the permissions of. Why? Because you want to see if you can overwrite some file or plant an exploit or payload, and etc. etc. So that was about permissions and Windows file system. I hope you enjoyed this and see you in the next video.